Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Latched Mama podcast. Melissa here. For those of you who are joining the Latched Mama podcast for the first time, it is a podcast for the mothers in the trenches of motherhood. We are going to start a fun two-part series this week. We are going to talk about some workplace laws and rights that you have during pregnancy and when you return back to the workplace. You're listening to Latched Mama Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Wirt, busy mom of 6 and owner of LatchedMama.com. Join us each week as we talk about pregnancy, breastfeeding, postpartum, and all things motherhood. Today, I have a really exciting guest with us. She's one of my favorite people in the world. She's also an incredible attorney that knows a whole bunch about our rights in the workplace as far as being pregnant and coming back to work, expressing milk. So today we are going to talk about what happens when you find yourself pregnant in the workplace, or you're looking for a job and you're pregnant and you don't want to tell your employer, all of that fun stuff. We just want to talk a little bit about everybody's rights and expectations legally. Hi, Leah.
Hi, I love that you said when you find yourself pregnant in the workplace. That's a very unique way of putting it.
Well, sometimes it's not planned. Sometimes you start a job and you get pregnant, and I don't know.
From the workplace?
Can you introduce yourself, please, to everybody?
Sure. Professionally, I am a management side employment attorney. I've been practicing a little more than 8 years. I help employers navigate employee issues and, get into compliance with different laws in the workplace. Harassment, discrimination, workplace violence, reasonable accommodations. Personally, I am single, no kids. Am I the first non-mom on your podcast?
You might be. No, we've had a couple men on the podcast, so they're not moms.
Okay, non-parents.
Probably.
Wow.
I know.
This is a milestone.
I don't know. Have we had any more? I don't think we have. I think everybody has been a parent for the most part.
No.
Kennedy. Oh yeah, Kennedy was on the podcast. Kennedy's not a parent.
Okay, all right. So not the first. Okay.
What else do you do in your free time? You play basketball. You
play basketball.
Dance?
Yeah, I hip hop dance.
Do you want to talk about Van?
I have a dog. His name is Van. He's missing half of an ear. I originally named him Picasso, thinking that was the painter that cut his ear off, and was horribly told in the dog park that no, it was actually Van Gogh. So then I had to change his name.
Did you have an advanced degree at that time?
I did, but the thing about being a lawyer is you gain so much confidence in yourself over time that sometimes you just don't
Arrogance?
Confidence? No, confidence. Let's go with confidence. Yeah.
Okay. you were just doubling down on the fact that it was Picasso that cut
Art
his ear
history
off.
is really not in my realm, but
it
you want
was
to
really
talk wage and hour
when
laws?
Leah first told me this story. I didn't know the end of it, and she's like, so I named him Picasso, and I was like, is she really an idiot? Does she really not know that Picasso was not? But anyway, needless to say, Van is really cute.
Yeah, well, thank you. No, that's not the first time Melissa's called me an idiot. When we first started working together, she shamed me.
What?
Yeah, you did. I said lactation on the breast.
No.
And you shamed me.
No.
You shamed me.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm allowed to shame people for not. No, shaming is not the proper word. You were talking about a court case, and you said, this woman is going to show up with lactation all over her shirt. And I said, Leah, you cannot show up in the courtroom and claim that woman has lactation all over her shirt. We're going to need to work on the way that we present this case.
Yeah.
So we cleared that up. So hopefully if that moment ever happens, you're going to actually be able to define what is occurring.
So I did appreciate that feedback.
Uh-huh.
It could have been delivered differently. So
we're working on it, guys.
But I went home that night and I did some intense Googling.
Uh-huh.
And I made sure I got up to speed on all things. I mean, if someone were to look at my Google history, it would be concerning that I'd have some kind of odd nursing fetish of some sort, because you
also had to prepare for this
podcast.
So
but
there's a lot of education that goes into it.
Yeah, there is. And I should have used the incognito tab because it's not.
Don't be ashamed for wanting to know how your body would work if you had a baby.
Colostrum. That's a word I learned.
Oh my God. This is what happens when you have an attorney on a podcast who's not had children.
For milk.
What is the format, please? Oh my God!
It's the thin, non-fatty milk, non-fatty low protein milk that comes out.
Guys, she did this for you all. There's no other reason why. There's no other reason why she would know any
I
of
did
this
this
right
for
now.
you. And that comes out before the hind milk.
Oh my gosh.
So
This is hilarious.
yeah, so
Okay.
I'm good to go. See, the laws I know, you guys, but not having had kids, still working on that.
Yeah. It's a little.
Yeah.
Okay. So we get a lot of questions in the Latch Mama Love Facebook group about pregnancy and what happens in the workplace when somebody becomes pregnant. I'm going to ask you some questions as an employer and as like a person. So am I required to, so let's say all of a sudden, let's say I am interviewing for a job. Am I required to tell my employer that I'm pregnant, or can my employer ask me if I'm pregnant?
No to both of those.
Okay.
So it's interesting because I will say I got a call this morning from a client actually, and in it the employee's start date was end of July of this summer, and the
Start date end of July
of this summer.
Okay.
And the employee said accepted the job offer and then sent a follow-up email and said, hey, I'm actually going to be out of the country. I'm going to be in India for 3 weeks for a religious ceremony. So my start date will now be July 21st. And the client was a little bit like, okay, I guess we have to work with that, right? It's a sort of an accommodation. Same is true with pregnancy in a sense, is no one has to disclose this stuff ahead of time. And I actually tell clients or managers, you don't want to ask that stuff during an interview, because if the person doesn't get the job, then they're going to be sitting there saying, could it have been the fact that I'm pregnant or that I'm soon going to be, taking time off to take care of a child?
And is that discrimination?
That would be. Absolutely. And so no one has to disclose it. But I will say, from a practical standpoint, once you get the job offer, it makes sense as early as possible to let a manager know, because they need to be able to work with you and address operational needs. And so there's got to be some, due diligence on the part of the employee and the employer ahead of time.
So the employee should not be scared once the job offer has been offered to be transparent about their pregnancy, because they do have protection.
Absolutely. Yeah. They have protection from non-discrimination at that standpoint. Now, would they have time off? The Family Medical Leave Act, the federal law that basically gives you time off. People refer to it sometimes as maternity leave, but it's really just unpaid medical leave. That only kicks in for an employee who's worked there at least a year and a certain amount of hours, and for employers with more than 50 employees. And so it might be that, yes, you get the job, but you're not necessarily entitled to some sort of protected leave within that first 12 months. Now, there are many state laws that come into play.
Okay.
And then from a practical standpoint, there are now new laws that also sort of require some kind of leave as a reasonable accommodation after someone gives birth. And so I would say most employers should be considering, some fair time off.
So if you start a job, so let's say you get pregnant, you get a job offer, you disclose that you're pregnant, but let's say you only have like 2 days of PTO, you're not there for a year, so FMLA doesn't work. Could your employer, let's say you want to take 3 or 4 days off after you have a baby? Like, the fact that we're even having this conversation in 2023 in the United States is crazy to me. But let's say you don't have enough PTO, your employer could let you go for having a baby.
It wouldn't be, quote, for having a baby, right?
It would be for not showing up for work.
Yeah. And that's the frustrating.
That is bananas.
It is.
To me.
It is. And you are Latched Mama, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you guys have, the laws set a baseline.
Okay.
And that baseline is very minimal. And I mean, we always encourage employers to, the laws say don't discriminate. Who wakes up in the morning and is like, I'm going to go out there and just, ruin people's day? No, the laws set a very low baseline. And I think it's really important from an employer standpoint to really go above and beyond, because you want to address things like good talent, retaining good talent. And it's like you just said, it's crazy. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I would say most employers would generally work with someone, but yeah, it's hard. That is a gap in the law that we are missing. Paid leave for time off after giving child.
But it's always something that you can negotiate. I mean, I guess it puts a woman in such a hard spot because you either have to disclose it during the negotiation for the job, and you actually have to negotiate some extra time off because you are pregnant, and then you have to hope that they're not going to not give you the job because you're pregnant, or you just have to run with it and hope that potentially they're going to give you leave when you do disclose that you're pregnant after you have the job.
Yeah,
it's insane to me.
Well, and Congress has really failed in this area because, you know, there have been a lot of times to try to get paid family medical leave passed, and it just keeps getting held up in Congress. So
it's ridiculous.
Absolutely. But I mean, that's why, I mean, you guys go so far above and beyond. So,
yeah, but I feel like sometimes we're in this bubble. Like you said before we even started this podcast, hey, we need to get outside of the Latch Mama bubble to actually talk about what's happening in the country, so this can actually apply to other women that aren't just at, you know, Latch Mama, where we actually give people time.
And I'm talking federal laws, right? So there very well may be state laws that require, you know, greater rights or paid family leave, and to some degree. So
let's talk a little bit about, so the pregnancy starts, even first trimester. You are.
Let me tell you this though.
Okay.
I meant to say this. So I was one time doing a management training for a group of managers. They were from all different types of manufacturing arenas, and had everybody close their eyes and basically was like, all right, no judgment. Who here has struggled to hire a young female because the female was pregnant or was fearful of getting pregnant? How many hands do you think what percent of hands do you think went up in the room?
At least 50%.
It was closer to 80. And this is something that women, I think, are fighting at the early interview process, even if you're not pregnant.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to be pregnant for someone to be sitting there thinking, from an operational standpoint as an employer, oh my gosh, I'm hiring people because I'm in dire need of making sure stuff goes out of my warehouse.
Yep.
And if they're going to take time off, where does that leave me?
It's so fascinating. I remember I went to Easter brunch at a local restaurant, and I've told this story on the podcast I think before, but it's a guy who owns a whole bunch of different restaurants here locally as well as in Richmond, and he's family friends with us, and we were sitting down and he kind of pulled up a chair to Easter brunch, or maybe it was Mother's Day brunch, I don't even know, but I was asking him about like small business life, and this is when Latch Mama was only a few years old, but I was still kind of in the trenches of people and hiring and stuff like that, and he was like, if I can give you one word of advice, and he had no idea what I did, he just knew that I owned a business. He was like, just be very, very careful about hiring women who could get pregnant, he said, because they never come back. And I was like, okay, well, wait a second. Like, it was completely like,
hold on, do you still eat there?
Me. What would you say?
Do you still eat there?
Yeah.
What? I thought you had morals.
No, I mean, I still eat there because it's like,
you like fries?
It's prime real estate. Yes, I do like French fries. They actually have a really good chicken sandwich now too, which is really good. But he was just very clear. He was like, they don't come back. He's like, I can't hire servers right now, he said, because they all keep getting pregnant and nobody wants to come back to work on the other side. And so I challenged him and I said, well, what do you offer them in terms of leave? Do you take care of them while they're out having said baby? And he looked at me, he goes, no, because I don't have to. And he came across, of course, to me and people who are listening to this as like a total jackass, but it is a very standard thing. I mean, same thing. I talked to a family member who owns a business, and I said, and he was talking about how his secretary was going out, and I said, what are you giving him for leave or giving her for leave? And he was like, nothing. And I was like, oh my God, you are so close to me in terms of family, and I own this company. Like, you can't not give her leave. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But it is just a standard thing in the United States. If you don't have to offer it, why offer it as a business?
Yeah, but and that's the thing, is the laws set a very basic baseline. But if you are doing the right thing, I mean, you're thinking about retention, you're thinking about retaining, like bringing back good talent, also ensuring that people have medical benefits during that time. I mean, think about, as a woman, how scary it is. You're pregnant. That's already, I'm sure, an anxiety-ridden feeling, or at least for me it would be. You've done it 6 times, so okay.
A lot of times, yep.
But yeah, I mean, you're like, oh my gosh, what does this do to my life? And then you're thinking, holy cow, if I'm let go, I might not have benefits.
Yeah.
So
it's crazy. So fast forward.
Think about this when you vote for your congressman.
Okay.
Or woman.
No politics. Welcome, Leah, to the Latched podcast. Anyways, so
we're starting again.
So let's say no. So let's say you start your job, okay, or you're in the workplace. You've told people you're pregnant at this point, and you start getting really nauseous at work, and you start getting sick, and you maybe have to go to the bathroom more, or maybe you need more breaks to eat snacks, or maybe you need snacks at your desk and they're not normally allowed, or you want to come in late, or you want to work from home. All of these different things. Where does that like accommodation line end and start in terms of what is reasonable? Because you're allowed to ask for some of those things, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So it is an interactive process. That's essentially what the law entails. It is a back and forth between the employee and the employer about, hey, here's what I'm going through, and here's how it's affecting my ability to do my job. And so that's really the key. Is it's not even about what could be causing it. I mean, let's say that if it's nausea that's making you come in late to work because you're pregnant versus depression and you can't get out of bed, either way, it's impacting your ability to do your job. And so the employer has to have some understanding of, okay, how does it impact your job? And then let's see if we can figure out a way to make this work. And the goal is to find a reasonable accommodation. Now, what is reasonable? It depends. It's a case-by-case basis.
So it is subjective.
Very, very much so. And there's a lot of things that would make something not reasonable. So, I mean, give me. Let's come up with an example.
Okay, let's go to the far extreme. Every time I stand up and I get vertical, first trimester of my pregnancy, I vomit. I want to be able to work from home in bed.
And what do you do for your job?
I work in a warehouse.
Okay.
The answer to that would be no.
Yeah, we can't. That's probably not reasonable, right? However, before you can go to this idea of, sorry, we have no work for you, it's okay. The next question is, can we transfer you to a different position in the meantime, temporarily? Yep. And part of that transfer is you can't really be reducing pay or benefits, or even if you're going to say, hey, we're going to move you from the warehouse to the filing, you're just going to be doing inventory on a computer. Maybe that at that point we could allow you to work from home, or we give you an office, we move you closer to a bathroom. That's something that we've worked out before. But the last resort I would say is leave as a reasonable accommodation.
Like leave.
Time off.
Like time off.
Yeah.
Like paid time off.
Yeah, I would. Absolutely. I would always say, that's the very last thing you ask for. Okay.
So being part of this process here on my side, I know what's normally required. It is, diagnosable, like documents from a doctor or something like that, right? Is that correct?
Diagnosable documents from a doctor. I don't know what that means.
But I guess you can't just be like, hey, I'm pregnant, I don't feel well. You have to be prepared to have something. You gotta help me out.
Okay, you mean documentation?
Yes, documentation.
Evidence? You have to have evidence for your pregnancy. Not even really. No. Certain other medical conditions. Yes, arguably yes. If someone says, "Hey, I'm really struggling to get my job done. I suffer from depression, or I've got back problems. I don't know if I can keep doing this warehouse job." Then yeah, arguably bringing in a note. But if it's, "Hey, I'm going to be taking time off after childbirth," then no, I would say, we go with the benefit of the, at that point, no one is making this up. So.
So much of this truly feels like just being a good human. And I feel like that's how we've kind of led this company of, hey, if your back hurts when you're doing inventory counting because you're pregnant, why don't we get you a chair? Or why don't we get you a nice little memory foam pad that you can kneel on, that makes you feel better? Or like I heard something in the group where they weren't allowed to fill their water bottle. Like they couldn't leave their station to go fill their water bottle during pregnancy because their employer wouldn't let them do that.
Wow.
Like those are the things that I want to make sure that people know that they have rights to ask for.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would say the earlier you can ask for them, the better off you're going to be. Because you have got to understand too that the employer has to kind of maybe adjust operations, but giving enough time and notice in terms of doing that is going to be in everyone's best interest.
I feel like so many people, especially women, especially mothers, have this like kind of like martyr like kind of philosophy where, hey, I'm not going to rock the boat. Hey, I'm not going to ask for more. I'm just going to deal with it and I'm going to get through. And I think what's really important, and one of the reasons why I wanted you on this podcast, is the more that you and I talk about some of this employment stuff, the more I realize that there really are protections that women need to know are available to them. I mean, as much as you and I both are on the more management side, I think it's important that people know that they're allowed to ask for these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I would say it's probably going to be in an employee handbook in terms of a process. But even if it's not, going to any manager, supervisor, human resources and saying, here's what I'm struggling with. Now, it's interesting because the laws that protect pregnant women, at least from the federal level, like we were just talking about, there certainly are still some gaps, but they're kind of late in the game. I mean, we only recently had a couple of new laws passed, even one recently passed this past year that's going into effect June 27th of this year, which is the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, and requires a broader range of reasonable accommodations for pregnant women, for childbirth-related medical conditions, for pregnancy-related medical conditions, and even specifying for lactation-related conditions. It's taken us till 2023 to really specify that in legislation.
It's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Do you have any cool stories to share from the past of anything that has just surprised you that that happens?
All the time.
Literally, one of my favorite things to do with Leah is just to hear stories. It makes me feel so much better as an employer sometimes because literally some of the bananas things that happen, like just the idea that there is so much profit and process in people's mind.
Sure.
And it's not people. Like if you go to the whole like Marcus Lemonis thing where he's like people, process, profit. There are so many businesses that are so focused on the profit and the process that this people piece is just like way out into outer space where we all know that I can focus a little bit more on the process and the profit. But I feel like I have the people thing pretty well down for the most part.
But not every company is run by Melissa from Latched Mama,
I don't deal well with the other ones. Absolutely could use some improvement.
No, I mean you mentioned the nausea thing, right? I've had a client who basically was like, well, the employee was struggling with having to go take more breaks to use the restroom to vomit. Yeah. I was gonna say that's good. It's a good word. It's an awkward word. But yeah, and the manager merely was like, well, what if we just got her a bucket?
Hold on. So they called you up and they said, hey, she's taking too many breaks.
No, that's the thing. They didn't call me up. The thing is, we got it via an employee complaint at that point in time. And I mean, that's the worst employees have rights. If your manager or your employer is not going to address the situation, you have rights, usually if through some sort of administrative agency.
Is there a law that says that an employee should have to vomit in privacy? Like they shouldn't be handed a bucket? I'm just trying to figure out how would this play out in a courtroom? Sure.
Yeah, no, it would look horrible on behalf. That is not a company I want to defend in the courtroom because you've got a jury that's going to sit there and be like, I'm sorry, what? But no, absolutely. It goes back to that. What is a reasonable accommodation? And not everybody is thinking along the lines of how you guys think here. So you've got to think of it like, okay.
I just cannot imagine who are these human beings that are like, hey, how about we go pick her up a bucket at Lowe's and she just keeps
she could just keep doing her work, like throwing up along the way. But this is what and what I tell people is, especially from the employer side, is it's going to work itself out. These things are temporary. I mean, I think a lot of times frontline managers and supervisors, they're dealing with the day-to-day. They're trying to, like you said, they're trying to deal with process and profit, and that people element or even the long-term thinking goes out the window when really, how long is a woman nauseous for usually? What's the average?
I don't know, like 20 weeks probably is the average. I mean, some for the entire pregnancy, but yeah. I mean, 12 to
Wow.
20 weeks. I know. You sign me up, right?
Yeah. Okay, wait.
But I mean, yeah, I mean, most people first trimester, I would say by 20, the vast majority of people are
Yeah,
feeling
it
better.
evens out. Yeah. But then you do have other issues, right? Maybe needing more bathroom breaks because of increased urination or something like that. So, or light duty as another option. But yeah, no, I think your frontline managers, they're so focused on that profit that they miss that element of, hey, this is something that this woman is dealing with. Hopefully temporarily, but even if it's not, even if it's more long term, that we can make it work. And the other big thing is, from an employer side, you're really not going to be able to say, oh my gosh, we lost X number of dollars attributed to the fact that Leah took 3 breaks to go vomit.
That's what's crazy to me.
Yeah.
It's like, what? Why?
Yeah.
Why? Like, why aren't we seeing it as literally just a part of life for many women? And we've set up our society to the point where, I mean, this crazy percentage of women, which is great, are working, through pregnancy and after they have their baby. Like, we need to realize that it needs to continue and it needs to
absolutely
happen.
And that's the thing. I think too, there's a cultural element to it in the sense that, well, every workplace is different. And so you guys are not the norm. And I think you have to recognize that. I mean, you're dealing with industries from manufacturing to healthcare to retail establishments. And so it is hard sometimes to accommodate a pregnant woman, but women have rights. So in one sense, if you can't be accommodated in your current job, then possibly a transfer temporarily to another position with the idea that there's no reduction in pay, because these laws also have an anti-retaliation element to them as well.
So what happens if you can't? Like, what happens if there's no way that there's an accommodation that's possible for somebody?
So my take would be they still have a right to at least unpaid leave as a reasonable accommodation.
Until said pregnancy or situation is taken care of.
Yes. Now, that's hard. I mean, how long could you go without pay? Now, in some cases, an employee could also ask for and apply for short-term disability during that time period. So that's another option. But yeah, it's hard.
So let's say we're getting through our pregnancy. We're getting closer to the time where we're going to deliver said baby. And you have to go out sooner than originally anticipated. FMLA can start sooner than actual birth. Is that correct? But then it's just 12 weeks total. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. Now, and that is, again, that only applies to employers with 50 or more employees, and it's unpaid. Now, again, you have state laws that come into play and maybe provide greater protections or a paid leave element to this, or even employer policies. Like I said, they can be even more generous. But yeah, so that can be a frustrating element, even though after that 12 weeks is up, the law also entitles an employee to leave as a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. So I think the interesting thing about pregnancy is there are a lot of medical conditions related to pregnancy that are not just covered under the pregnancy laws, but also under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So give me a medical condition related to
gestational diabetes.
Okay.
Sciatica.
Okay.
You want more?
Go for it. Just list them all out.
I don't know. What else can happen? High blood pressure?
Yeah. All right. So employee has high blood pressure and sciatica. Okay.
All right.
All right. And she's pregnant. She's due in 4 weeks, but she has to go out, let's say, on bed rest due to the high blood pressure. Okay.
Yep.
So now your FMLA starts. And hopefully you can use some sort of paid leave concurrently with that, or if your employer would provide that.
So concurrently meaning
at the same time.
I got that. Thank you. Thank you for defining that to me. I don't know. I get that I do not have the degrees you have, but concurrently I get it. But does the FMLA, so let's say you have 3 weeks of paid leave. Can you take your 3 weeks of paid leave and then following that your FMLA starts?
No, the FMLA would run concurrently at the same time. You cannot delay the implementation of FMLA. That said, so it runs concurrently.
But why would you ever do that? why wouldn't you just take your leave and then tell them that you need to go out?
I mean, arguably you could, but an employer also has the ability to retroactively designate. But I would say for an employee not to be overly concerned because, so let's say it does start.
Okay.
And at that 3 weeks before you deliver.
Uh-huh.
And it's running concurrently.
Thank you.
You burn the paid leave element. Maybe your employer also provides some sort of, sick leave or parental leave that could fill in some of those gaps, or short-term disability. The 12 weeks is up, but now at this point, you're still caring for your child. I mean,
Child is here.
Baby is born. Baby
Okay.
is here.
Here.
Okay. You can, at this point, arguably ask for leave as a reasonable accommodation. Now, you would have to have some sort of medical condition associated with that for it to be covered, because again, now we're talking the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Okay.
And but I think, women often, I don't think I ever see a pregnancy-related employment situation that doesn't also involve a medical condition that a woman is dealing with. And I think that might just be the nature of how difficult it is to be pregnant and to give birth. I mean, I often hear about postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, and an employer dealing with, okay, we want to bring this employee back. She's ready. She says she's ready to come back, but she wants to come back part-time because she's struggling with postpartum depression. How can we navigate this? And so I think even if you burn that 12 weeks, there's going to be some option for the employee, certainly working with their doctor as well, to get any sort of medical documentation they would need to support it, but additional time off beyond that if it's necessary.
So that situation that you just talked about.
Sure.
Talk to me about some solutions you've come up with in the past with employers.
Sure. Well, many laws even give you examples of pregnancy-related accommodations and childbirth and medical related accommodations. So modified work schedules would be some, light duty, reducing strenuous activity.
But if somebody says, hey, I want to come back, I'm ready to come back, but I want to come back part-time because I am struggling with anxiety, being away from my child, I'm having these intrusive thoughts, it's just, it's hard for me, I want to come back slowly. And an employer reaches out to you and says, hey, Leah, what do we need to do? First of all, I would assume that the employee needs to document said conditions.
What did you call it earlier?
Diagnosable documentation. I don't know. Whatever. Thanks for remembering that. I appreciate it. So they would need to provide that. And then the employer would have to do that in such a way that does not change their rate of pay. Is that what you said earlier? Or
yeah, no. And I think you're along those right lines. So, at that point, you're engaging in the interactive process. This is the back and forth. Here's what I'm dealing with. Here's what I'm struggling with. Possibly you need that diagnosable documentation or whatever you called it.
That's the best line ever. You're going to start using that.
And then at the same time, trying to figure out how can you make this work for this employee. And not all accommodations are going to be long-term. Oftentimes, if you're an employee and what you really need is part-time, taking some time off, I would say go for it. And sometimes to reduce the ease on an employer to be able to say, hey, I think just for a couple weeks, this is what I need. I'm working through this. I'm attending counseling. Also, as a reasonable accommodation, I often encourage employers offer counseling, offer EAP of some sort or some sort of employee assistance program.
Okay.
Yeah. You guys offer some.
Ours is a little bit more kind of probably more subjective.
No, but our Latched Mama has some sort of. You have lactation counseling.
We have a whole bunch of ours is a little bit more case by case basis, kind of like what you're talking about. Probably not anything that you'd probably like it to be more not case by case basis. But can you ask for, let's say you're coming back to work and you really want to continue therapy. Is a reasonable accommodation asking for an extended lunch break so you can fit your therapy in during the day or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's what is reasonable. So I would say if an employee needs 1 hour a week for an extended lunch break, then yes, absolutely. I think an employer is going to have a hard time showing that that's unreasonable.
It's just crazy because I don't think that the majority of women in the United States know that they're even allowed to ask for that.
Which is, I think part of that is how late our laws are not caught up with what is right and just. I'll say that. So it might help to give a little bit of the history of how these laws have sort of evolved. So Title VII of the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. That protected women in the workplace just on the basis of sex. So let's say, before that, it was perfectly legal to say, I'm not going to hire you because you're a woman.
Into what year was this?
1964.
Ooh, okay.
At the same time,
hold on, literally 64.
64.
That's not that long ago.
No,
okay.
No, it's not. At the same time, that provided protections for people in the workplace on the basis of race, right? You have the civil rights movement going on, national origin, color, religion. It wasn't until 1978 that the Civil Rights Act was amended to add protections for women on the basis of pregnancy. So we were protecting.
What year was this?
1978.
78. Okay.
So we're protecting, and that's the Pregnancy Non-Discrimination Act, but we're protecting women just on the basis of gender, but pregnant women not having the same rights. It was still, at that time, arguably someone could say it was legal to say, no, I'm sorry that, we don't have to hire you because you're pregnant.
Or they could fire somebody for getting pregnant while they were working.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating.
1978.
I mean, that was like 2 years before I was born.
Yeah.
3 years before I was born. I know I'm old. So what happens after that? So now the laws are slowly changing.
Yeah, but slowly, and we still have these gaps. So then you have 1990s, the Americans with Disabilities Act is passed. Oh, and so the Pregnancy Non-Discrimination Act, that said basically don't discriminate against a pregnant woman. And it did have some anti-retaliation protections. However, it didn't have enough teeth from the accommodation standpoint, like you were asking me. It basically said, sure, an employer has to accommodate a pregnant woman only if they provide those same accommodations for disabled employees. So if you run a truck driving company and an employee has chronic back pain and can no longer drive the truck, and you don't have any other positions available, or you don't have light duty of some sort, then you wouldn't have to provide any sort of leave or other accommodations for the pregnant employee in that same boat. So then it was the Americans with Disabilities Act that passed in 1990, and that really didn't specifically protect pregnant women or to require accommodations, but it basically said if you have a medical condition related to a pregnancy, like you were just talking about, diabetes, then an employer should try to find a reasonable accommodation. And that's what kickstarted that interactive process. Okay, let's go back and forth and see how this impacts your job and how we can help it. And then it wasn't until like 2010 that you started having protections in the workplace for, break time for women to express milk. And then
it's fascinating.
And it's going to be a little bit, I'm going to nerd out on you for a second, but it's kind of crazy because this past year we had an expansion of that through something called the Pump Act. And that now applies to all employees, whereas in 2010, it really only applied to employees that were entitled to overtime. And it also now requires employers to go above and beyond when it comes to lactation. We can certainly talk about that, but there was another law that I think I mentioned earlier, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, that gets passed here, and that goes into effect June 27th of 2023. It's not in effect yet,
It's not even there yet.
Yeah, and that's the one that really adds more teeth. That basically says,
hey, you can't give a woman a bucket to puke in.
Absolutely, yeah. That says you need to consider these reasonable accommodations.
You have to allow them to refill their water bottle during work.
Absolutely. And it's not just accommodating someone who's pregnant or a pregnancy-related medical condition. It's also a childbirth-related medical condition and even lactation-based medical conditions. So it adds further protections and it adds more teeth in terms of remedies. If someone is not being treated fairly, they have more remedies to try to pursue that. So
that's incredible. All right, guys. So next week we are going to talk about what happens after said baby is born and you come back to work in terms of expressing milk and things like that. Thanks, Leah.
Thank you, Melissa.